Okay, task 6. This is one which a lot of people missed the class, so it's a little bit harder for you. So what we're looking at here is the impact on organisational structures on behaviour within the organisation. And the optimum is when we have our structure is the one that is best matching the needs of the actual environment, and often this is what's carried out in the strategic planning process. Some of you might end up studying that with me down the track. So if we have a look at our organisation, so the idea of using a triangle, so if we have our the idea of a triangle is like that. So when it's a flat triangle, it's suggesting there's few layers and more elements sideways. Whereas with the pointy triangle, it is many more layers vertically with smaller numbers in each layer. So if we look at comparing these two types of structures, and how you break down the structure can be by function, areas of tasks to be completed, or by geographical region, those sorts of things. If you have a structure with lots of layers, then information is going to take longer to flow up and down the layers. And I can think of one communication I sent in defence that had to go for about, I think it was 7 layers, and it took 5 months. So going through the desks of successive people going up. So that's the disadvantage, is that it happens more slowly. The advantage is that the areas of knowledge are more specialised, and that you get much more rigour in the decision because it's gone through lots of people's desks. So if you have a structure that looks more like this, let's remember that these things are a spectrum. They're not just one or the other. You can have one where it's getting wider and wider. So you find the optimum for your organisation. This one's going to be faster communication, faster decision making because there's less layers, but a broader job type and less specialists in this sort of organisation. So this is the more sort of modern approach. But there's places when this one's more suited when there is that need for the rigorous decision making, and we might still be seeing that. I've mentioned that defence is like that, and the police and customs and corrections, being of military origins, still have that sort of structure too often, and often due to the fact that the level of scrutiny also needs to be high, hence the reason for it in defence. So what you need to do for this task, so the first one, we're required to do a PowerPoint. So you need to use your PowerPoint to create a structure. So you need to draw one of these in PowerPoint. And the process for that is if you click on Insert at the top of the tabs, Insert, then, Smart Art. And then over on the left side, we'll open a box, and within that you choose Hierarchy. You click on the one you want, and it'll be in the slide when the box closes. So then you can just click on these elements in the hierarchy and change them to whatever you need it to be. So you need to do it for a little piece of an organisation in a justice environment. So just choose one. Now remember, for these tasks, I'm about seeing the theory. It doesn't have to be really how they actually structured. I don't care if I don't need you to go researching that. If you can make one where you describe it. If you're not feeling like you want to use your own one, just do something like a suburban police station with a senior sergeant, senior constable, maybe some constables and maybe a detective. Just use that sort of model. And then what you need to do to answer that, on the next 1 or 2 slides, just talk about these concepts. So talk about communication in terms of that, how it's more flexible or not. Talk about how, whether it's functional. So down here we have the geographical or functional. So is that, how have you decided to break it down these ways? So if it was the detective, then that's functional because you've got uniform and detective. But you can do it for customs, or you can do it for corrections, or some other area in justice you're interested in. Talk about perhaps the scalar chain. That's the length of the connection between 2 positions. You could talk about how big the span of control is. The span of control is smaller the more different the particular jobs are, or the more attention that they're going to be requiring. So you could talk about the idea of how centralised is authority. Is all the authority at the top and every decision needs to be made there? Or has authority been delegated down that will make, again, decision making faster, but there will be more less scrutiny. So you could talk about the degree to which it's formalised. So how much policy is there? So I dare say police is a lot like defence, where there would be volumes of policy on the way things should be done. Policy, like we might already be familiar with things like the Code of Conduct from our ethics class. So the degree of vertical coordination. So the degree to how much the way things are done down here are decided up the top. And we remember from Frederick Winslow Taylor in management, that's normally people like to have more control over the way they do things. So that's question one. Draw the chart in PowerPoint, one slide, labelled and to a specific example, and then just talk about a number of these principles against your chart. Even if they're not key in your chart, just show that you can understand what these concepts are, and that's all that's required. Now the part two there is the idea of a job redesign. So in an organisation, each square is a position or a job. We don't normally think of them in terms of the people. We use Weber's idea of thinking about them as jobs, alluding there to the Max Weber in the management class we looked at. So with job redesign is when we're determining what the characteristics of these jobs are. So is there rotation amongst positions? How flexible is the timing? What's the geographic location? Can people work at home? Those sorts of things. So if you have a look down here, there's some concepts around job design. So what we need, we're required to do a survey. So all I need is a list of the questions that would be in the survey. You don't actually have to conduct the survey. And the scenario is that you're doing a survey to a new team that you've taken over. You're perhaps looking at redesigning the way the jobs are distributed, so it's a workforce planning. And then you're doing a survey to see how what people like or don't like about their job. Because if you make a job closer to what their needs are, then there's a better chance that they'll stay in the position. So let's have a look here at the concepts. There's the idea of job simplification or job enlargement. And we can look at that as a spectrum. So if we have simplification, or enlargement. So if we look at simplification or enlargement, simplification means that we're going to make the job less complex. There's going to be a less variety of tasks. Enlargement means there's going to be a greater variety of tasks. And what happens is that people are going to have a natural preference. So simplification, when we think of when Henry Ford did his production line, instead of someone making a whole car from scratch, they might just do one small part of the process. It was all broken down. So they might be putting on the left front wheel, and they might do that all day. But that's not going to be, for most people, a very exciting job, because that would mean that they would be doing the same thing, which is not very interesting. So there'd be a level of how many different tasks before they reach what would be the optimum for the individual. So what we're going to do in our survey is find out where they are on this spectrum. So you're talking to people working in a corrections or a justice environment. You can't be saying, where would you like your job to be on the simplification enlargement scale? Because they won't know what you're talking about. So in your questions, phrase them in ways that they'll understand, perhaps using how complex your job. And, there's no real scale for how, measurement for how complex a job is. So ask what their perception is. So for that, we might use something like a Likert scale. And you've seen them before, maybe from research, where you have the question and ask them how much they agree. You could have, say, 1 to 10. And you could ask them, so how complex is your job? and on a scale of 1 to 10, and they might say 4. Then you might ask them, how complex would you like their job to be? They might say 6. And that would mean that you could know that they want their job to be about 20% more complex. So you've got an indication. So you've got an indication for something which is very grey and otherwise hard to determine. So another concept you could look at in your questions is job rotation, whereby you rotate through positions. That can be good when maybe some tasks are more unpleasant than others and you can't really split them up. Then rotating people through that role. And you might see that on things like man in front counter and such, where it can be a bit demanding and a different pace and those sorts of things. Job enrichment is going back to that idea of how much control we have over the way we do our job. So all this is in your handout. So just recapping for this last question. Question 1, you're looking at this page and this page, and incorporating some of that theory in discussing this, which you've drawn in PowerPoint. Question 2, you're doing maybe 8, 10 questions about a job as a survey, trying to look at mapping the preferences of people who are in jobs in your area and against these sorts of parameters. You could, if you like, jump on the Google and look for some other parameters in job design, but here's some that you might consider. Okay, so that is task 6.